The U.S. President Donald Trump says talks with Iran will resume today. He told reporters that a deal on the Strait of Hormuz is imminent and another on denuclearization expected soon.
Iran and Oman earlier said they were close to finalizing a new route through the Strait of Hormuz, which they jointly control. Iran's chokehold on the key waterway has been a key point of contention, causing tensions to flare. Tehran warned the strait will not return to its pre-war status.
Developments come after the U.S. leader held off further military action against Iran, pending what he said was an expected rapid deal to end the war. Both sides have been trading fire, blaming each other for violating the terms of their interim ceasefire struck nearly 2 months ago.
And for the very latest, let's speak with Behnam Ben Taleblu, Iran Program Senior Director and Senior Fellow as well at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Behnam, good to see you again. So I just want to clarify, are we talking about the same deal here? I mean, we had President Trump suspending those strikes, saying, you know, there is the perimeters of a deal, quote unquote. Iran, meantime, saying, you know, they're in you know, I suppose the last stages of an agreement with Oman on the waterway. Is it the same thing, or do we again have different interpretations of what's on the table?
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you both. Certainly, this place seems familiar. Certainly, to folks paying attention, it also seems frustrating. There's no doubt that the overwhelming priority for the Trump administration and for many in Washington is to find a way to get the Strait of Hormuz open. And it seems to me that the U.S., at least in the short term, is punting the diplomatic process from itself to the Omanis, where the Omanis have been bilaterally negotiating with the Islamic Republic over potential transit routes. There was drama over the Omanis and the Iranians negotiating just last week because they had some diametrically different views as to how tankers should enter and exit the Strait of Hormuz, which, as you know, is a very critical waterway to the global oil trade, energy trade, and many of the other industrial agricultural trades as well. To that effect, we won't know if the interpretations are different so long as there is no deal governing how to enter and exit. And there still will be, you know, a state of hostility between the Islamic Republic and America, not least because they just fought a war. And for 47 years, the Islamic Republic has been saying death to America. So no doubt things are tense. No doubt the president is looking for a diplomatic off-ramp. But also, I would just caution everyone, we've been here before. We've been on the precipice of war and diplomacy, and one side picks diplomacy, and we still go back to a shooting war.
Yeah, indeed, especially when it comes to Mr. Trump. We have seen this pattern before. He has gone from threatening strikes to talking deals once again. What's different this time, though? Is he responding to real diplomatic progress here or to pressure from Gulf allies that are worried about a wider war?
Well, certainly, I think the stakes are different, especially for the president and the Republican Party, and also for U.S. foreign policy as you get closer and closer to the midterm. So the room for maneuver the president and his party have as it comes to oil prices, as it comes to insurance and the shipping market, for example, the room for maneuver and the room for error diminishes, which raises the cost politically of the fork in the road of either diplomacy or war that the U.S. is in. Now, at the same time, of course, if last year is any precedent, and I certainly believe it is, it's not that the U.S. is going to try to pick one. The challenge for Washington is how to kind of do them all. You may remember this famous phrase, all options on the table. I think in the past 1.5, 2 years of the Trump administration's term 2.0 policy towards Iran, you're seeing all of the options on the table. And the challenge is that they're almost being pursued simultaneously. And the fear here is that the Islamic Republic is seeing a trend. The president makes threats and the president backs down. Now, that doesn't mean that the U.S. won't shoot again. Certainly, I think the pattern is that they have been pushed back into conflict, but that this could lead the Islamic Republic to overplay its hand, escalate, thinks it has carte blanche, and then find itself in a larger regional war. So while no doubt, I think that the pro-American states, the Arab states of the Persian Gulf, did reach out to the president because of their concerns of a wider war, the U.S. was also quite public about looking for an off-ramp anyway.
Okay, speaking of a Strait of Hormuz, Behnam, Iran says it's close to a shipping deal with Oman. The framework that we know so far seems to leave the Straits administration somewhat ambiguous. But if that gives Tehran a greater role in managing the Strait of Hormuz. How acceptable would that be to Washington? Could it become the price of avoiding a wider regional war?
There certainly are some in Washington who are counseling that. There certainly are some in Washington who are saying that, namely that even if only for expedient political reasons to give a little when it comes to the Strait of Hormuz now to get a lot. I actually have great concerns about that. You often will have a greater price to pay if you recognize in some degree, formally or informally, a measure of Iranian control. And let me just say, I don't think that's the direction Washington is going in, at least institutionally. You just saw the Treasury Department recently sanction the Iranian-backed insurance company for the Persian Gulf Transit Authority, this new kind of pseudo-governmental body that the Iranians created in the aftermath of the 40-day war starting in the spring of this year. So certainly Washington institutionally is looking to continue to oppose efforts at Iran showing that it has control. But the question is, de facto, if Washington recognizes some part of a deal between Oman and the Islamic Republic, well, then isn't the shipping world, isn't the insurance world, isn't the political world going to be forced to stick and going to be forced to choose between de facto versus de jure recognition?
Behnam, to your point earlier about the Gulf nations, we have reports that say Saudi Arabia's crown prince personally called President Trump to urge, the suspension of strikes, warning of the risk to Gulf energy infrastructure and to their desalination plants. But we also know that Saudi Arabia recently retaliated against Iraqi militias, but not Iran directly. So I'm wondering right now, is Riyadh and other Gulf nations boxed in? They can hit out at the proxies, but not the patron, for fear they become the primary target itself. And I wonder what that means, down the road for their relationships with Iran.
I think the Islamic Republic is forcing many of the countries in the region to have to walk and to have to chew gum at the same time, to have to pursue some sort of a policy towards the proxy and some sort towards the patron without really being able to turn a blind eye to one or both or either at this point in time. So fundamentally, yes, the Saudis militarily responded, by the way, with the U.S. via CENTCOM against those Iran-backed Shia militias in Iraq. But, important to note, that was not the first time that Iran-backed Shia militias in Iraq launched drones at Saudi oil installations. You can go back to as early as 2021. And so that's how long the Saudis had been keeping their powder dry, trying to nest this challenge of patron and proxy into a larger, more coherent, more unified approach. But the problem is the attacks continue, the war continue, the political relationship at the 500,000-foot level and at the energy level remains solid with Washington. But in terms of America's commitment and willingness and presence in the region and an ability to meaningfully roll back the threat from Iran and its proxies, that's something that in the past maybe 8 years, 5 years has really ebbed and flowed, which is leading to some of these Saudi measures like diplomacy to talk about, de-escalating things with the patron, but military force being used against the proxy.
Behnam, this is a related question. The New York Times reporting that Iran used the last ceasefire window to coordinate plans with Hezbollah, with the Houthis, and also Iraqi militia to look at ways to expand, their reach and the war. So how much of this is on the minds of U.S. negotiators and Gulf leaders, as they try to reach another ceasefire?
If it's not, I would say it absolutely has to be. There's two sets of relationships that the Islamic Republic is pursuing almost simultaneously that the constituencies you mentioned need to worry about. One are the state relationships. You can basically call them this anti-American authoritarian axis of aggressors. This is Russia, this is China, this is North Korea. How the state of the Islamic Republic is looking to other bigger, more capable states to kind of build back better, particularly when it comes to military technology and intelligence, to be able to withstand a potential other round of a U.S.-Israeli fire. And then on the sub-state side, the proxies, the partners, the transnational terror network, because we have been, whether we like it or not, living in a series of regional wars since the Iran-backed attack of Hamas against Israel following on October 7 and Israel's military responses there, we have been living in various regional wars. And it's clear that the Islamic Republic expects more of these proxies, but they are less capable today thanks to US and Israeli military pressure. So there is a real move, I fully believe the story in the New York Times, to try to bring about greater command and control, but while playing to the strengths of these organizations, which over the past 10 years has been these organizations becoming from terror organizations into hybrid military warfighters. And I think perhaps the increased Iranian hand here is going to move them back to basics, back to the grassroots, back to the things that gave these organizations strength to begin with, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Behnam, always good talking to you. Thank you very much for joining us. Behnam Ben Taleblu is Iran Program Senior Director and Senior Fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies.